So you are done with cookie cutter programs and you want to start writing your own training programming. Or you're keen to start coaching other powerlifters, so you need to start designing programs for others. But the problem is you're not sure what you need to know to be good enough to start writing training programs. Luckily, in this video, I will list out everything that you need to start learning so you are in a strong enough position to start writing effective training programs. And if you stay to the end, I will also point you towards some useful resources and my best advice that I wish I heard when I first started coaching. So without any delay, let us begin. My name is Cheung and I've been coaching powerlifting for over a decade. In my career, I've coached individuals and university teams to compete internationally. In this video, I will go through 10 things that you need to learn and understand in order to be able to program powerlifting training effectively. Now, if you want to learn to program for powerlifting training, we want to get some of the basic concepts right. In a perfect world, we would be able to design a perfect training program. Now, a perfect training program would consist of the following: prescribe the perfect exercises, prescribe the perfect amount of the perfect exercise, prescribe the perfect amount of the perfect exercise consistently. Obviously, the perfect world does not exist, or at least we will never know if what we are doing is the perfect amount of the perfect thing. But we don't live in a perfect world, we live in a real world. And a useful place to start is if we visualize our training on a spectrum of effectiveness. On one end, we have optimal, and then as we move along, then we have what is less optimal but effective, and then we have what's ineffective, and then on the extreme end, we have what is detrimental. In order for us to be able to do all of this to design effective training programs, there are concepts, principles, ideas, and processes that you need to learn to be able to competently write programs. And this is what we are going to go through today. So the first thing that you need to understand are the principles for training. Now, before I tell you what training principles are, let me define what we mean by a principle. So according to Google, a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior, or for a chain of reasoning. So what does that mean regarding training principles? This means that these principles are ideas that we believe to be necessary and true, and ultimately needs to dictate what we do for effective training to happen. Now, there are many variations and interpretations across the world of sports science and strength and conditioning research of what the training principles are, but the core principles are going to be the principle of specificity, overload, recovery or fatigue management, the principle of variation or variability, the principle of reversibility, and the principle of individualization or individuality. So some people consider some of these principles to be coupled and are different sides of the same principle, such as specificity and variation. So these are considered some of the core principles. There are other principles that other people may consider, including the principle of phase potentiation, as well as the principle of evidence-based practice. In a later video, I will be defining what some of these principles mean and how they apply to your training programming. But the important thing to take away is that all of these principles should be applied to the design of training programs. Now, these principles will manifest itself with the choice of training variables such as the exercise selection, training modality, the quantitative aspects of training, including but not limited to sets, reps, intensity, and frequency. So the second topic that you need to understand is human biology, specifically anatomy and physiology. So when we talk about anatomy, what we're really referring to is the study of the structure and organization of the human body. Now, understanding anatomy requires studying the tissues, the organs, and the systems to understand how they work together to support life and function. And physiology is the study of how the parts function and work together to maintain the body's internal balance. It explores the processes and mechanisms that occur within the body to carry out various functions. Physiology focuses on understanding how different systems in the body, such as the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, and the nervous system, work. Now, understanding anatomy and physiology is important for prescribing effective training programs because it allows you to have a basic understanding of what happens during the body after exercise. So consequently, this knowledge can inform exercise selection, training modality, and the quantitative aspects of training such as sets, reps, intensity, and frequency. Additionally, understanding anatomy and physiology can also help you prevent injury and design programs that are tailored to the lifter's needs and abilities. So the third topic that you need to understand is exercise and movement, or specifically biomechanics. Now, this is going to build on top of the previous topic because biomechanics is the sports science field that blends physics and biology together to explore how our bodies move and interact with the environment. It delves into the mechanical aspects of the biological systems, examining structures, functions, and motions at various levels. And understanding biomechanics is important for programming effective training because it allows you to understand how the body moves and interacts with the environment during an exercise. And this knowledge can obviously inform exercise selection, training modality, as well as the qualitative aspects of training from warm-up drills to primary and accessory exercises. So by understanding biomechanics, you can design programs that are relevant to the lifter's performance and movement, as well as mobility needs and abilities, and prevent injury. So if you understand biomechanics, then you will understand the main 3 lifts to a deeper level, which will help you program around the movements that you wish to reinforce or change through programming. So the 4th thing that you need to understand is the sport of powerlifting. Specifically, what I am referring to is what the rules of performance are for the lifts, how competitions are run, and the nature of the sport in terms of common injuries and so on. Understanding the nature of the sport will give you an insight on whether there are certain things that you want to take into consideration when it comes to writing a program. For example, is this lifter, whether it be you or someone else, currently able to perform to the competition standards? And if not, or if so, you want to make the program exercises and training difficulty accordingly. Understanding the inherent risks with the sport may have more implications with how you may mitigate risks through how you design the program. For example, looking at where injuries predominantly happen and explore what the risk factors are. This may have implications with paying attention to how much specificity you have in your program and how well you manage fatigue in training to avoid overuse injuries and so on and so forth. So the 5th thing that you need to understand is how to perform a needs analysis. So this is something that I learned to do when I previously worked as an accredited strength and conditioning coach. Now, a typical needs analysis in S&C is the process of identifying the needs of the sport and the athlete's specific needs and goals to create a customized training program tailored to them. In this case, obviously the sport is powerlifting. After you run a needs analysis, what you end up with is a big picture of where an athlete is now, and it provides the first steps to figuring out what an athlete needs moving forward. One way of thinking about what your needs analysis is like an algorithm for figuring out your first training program. It involves assessing the athlete's training history across all physical activities, their current level of performance in the sport, identifying any weaknesses, and determining their specific goals and objectives. Therefore, understanding how to perform a needs analysis is essential to designing effective strategies for that athlete. And the 6th topic that you need to understand are periodization concepts and training variables. So periodization is simply the deliberate manipulation of training variables to optimize performance for competition, prevent overtraining, as well as progress long-term. Periodization often involves dividing training program into distinct periods or phases, each with slightly more specific goals and objectives. Now, this allows for more gradual progression and adaptation, while also minimizing the risk of injury and burnout. Training variables refer to the specific aspects of training that can be manipulated, such as exercise selection, sets, reps, intensity, and frequency. Now, understanding periodization and training variables is important for writing effective training programs because it allows for a systematic approach to programming that can lead to potentially better results and increased performance. There are various ways that you can periodize training, and they come in the form of periodization models. These models come with unique features of how training variables evolve over a specific time period. Quite often, various models are used simultaneously in most advanced programming. By manipulating the variables of training in specific ways during different phases of a program, lifters can then achieve specific goals and adapt to the rigors of training over time. So the 7th thing that you need to understand is monitoring. Monitoring training involves tracking and analyzing various aspects of the lifter's training program, such as training volume, intensity, and recovery. And the aim is to evaluate the progress and make adjustments as needed. By understanding training monitoring, you can then design programs that are tailored to the lifter's ongoing performance and how they progress week after week to ensure that the program is moving towards the right direction. Additionally, tracking progress through training monitoring allows you to make data-driven decisions about changes to the program rather than relying on guesswork or subjective feedback. Various coaches actually have their own ideas on what metrics to monitor and what metrics to put a bit more weight on. For example, some coaches like to use last set RPE to figure out how hard a lifter found a session for a given exercise, or total reps and tonnage to see how much work the lifter has done during a session. Along with knowing what to track, knowing the picture that these metrics draw up, and knowing what to do with these metrics is also going to be important too, because ultimately the goal is to use these metrics to help you better understand the state that the athlete is in. So the 8th thing that you need to understand is evidence-based practice. Now, evidence-based practice in this context refers to the process of making informed programming decisions based on a combination of the best available scientific evidence, your own personal expertise, and the individual athlete's needs and preferences as well. Now, evidence-based practice in this context refers to the process of making informed programming decisions based on a combination of the best available scientific evidence, your own professional expertise, as well as the individual's needs, responses, and preferences as well. It is a systematic approach that uses empirical evidence to determine the efficacy of the training methods. So when writing an initial training program, you should start with establishing the landscape of what the guidelines are and what general research evidence says, along with the lifter's training history and experience. You should also remember that guidelines and evidence research are based on averages, and putting more weight on the lifter's previous training is going to be more important. Adding your own expertise and experience is useful, but it's also important to remember your own biases towards training and how they play out in how you write the programs. So the ninth thing that you need to learn to use is spreadsheets or training program platforms. So unless you're stuck in the early 20th century, the majority of you will probably want to use some sort of spreadsheet software or an alternative platform for managing and monitoring training programs. The advantage of these training program platforms is that they are purpose-built for managing and prescribing training programs. So they already have the functionality that you are likely to use already built in it. But the disadvantage is that they are likely going to be charging you an ongoing fee. Fortunately, you can use a free spreadsheet program like Google Sheets. In my opinion, spending a bit more time investing in learning how to use spreadsheets will be useful, as it will ultimately help you draw up programs and monitor key metrics and present them accordingly. If you do use a program like Google Sheets, you'll want to learn to use various different formulas that the spreadsheet program has to offer, as they will help you organize your metrics as well as present your data in a visual way, such as graphs or charts. So the final thing that I think that you need to understand is human psychology. Now, if you ask, what does psychology have to do with training? I hear you ask. Well, in my experience, understanding how the lifter perceives and experiences the program will be important. The key things to look out for is what kind of lifter that you are programming for, and how their psychology and personality affects what they would most likely adhere to in training. Things like whether they are someone who needs a lot of variety in the training, or whether they are someone who does not mind the continuity of exercise selections. You may also wonder whether they are someone who mentally responds well to certain programming strategies or not. Understanding how someone is likely to behave with certain strategies is going to be something that you learn on the way, as opposed to something that you learn prior. And this will take time and experience to learn, and forms part of the individualization of training. So these are 10 things that you should learn in order to be able to program effectively. Now, as promised, here are some useful resources that I highly recommend, and they are resources that I have personally found useful and influential in my own programming. So the first one will be Zach Coppell's free Human Matrix course. So just to be transparent with you guys, Zach Coppell is one of my many mentors that I have hired to help educate me about biomechanics, and he's honestly one of the most knowledgeable people that I have ever worked with. He has a doctorate in physical therapy, as well as being a certified S&C specialist, and has worked with the general population as well as high-level athletes. His Human Matrix course is a great free resource to give you guys a glimpse into biomechanics and some useful frameworks that I personally use with my own coaching career. And truth be told, it's better than some paid courses on the internet. So the next two resources that I recommend are websites, and they are from individuals that I personally follow. They provide a decent summary and review of some of the research of important topics regarding resistance training. The first one that I really recommend is Menno Henselmann's site. He is a physique competitor historically, but has good experience with working with scientific research. What I really like about his site is that he has a ton of articles that dispel myths, as well as review ongoing research in the field of strength training as well. It's also worth noting that these are people's interpretation of research, so you should always take what they write with a pinch of salt. The other website that I have found useful is Stronger by Science. Now, this website is mostly written by Greg Nuckols, and he does a really good job at providing a review of research in the health and strength training world. He also has a link to a comprehensive list of systematic reviews and meta-analysis papers related to strength and physique research. Now, if you don't know what a systematic review and meta-analysis paper is that they are generally the strongest in the hierarchy of scientific evidence. These type of research papers give a good idea of guidelines in terms of strength training prescriptions if you're not sure where to start regarding programming training dose. So the book I'm referring to is the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning book. This is a standard textbook used by many S&C coaches and provides a good baseline understanding of sport and exercise science. It goes through all the scientific ideas that you need to understand about human anatomy and physiology and its applications to strength training. So those are some of the resources, and as a bonus, here are some of my best advice that I wish I had when I first started coaching. So the first one is going to be, your programming at the start will probably not be that good, but that's okay. You will get better over time. Understand that there is so much information out there about strength and powerlifting training programming, and it takes building up a lot of experience to get a feel for what works and what doesn't work. You'll also learn over time and learn to master your craft with programming for powerlifting. So honestly, Don't be too bummed out if the program doesn't work well to begin with. Remember that understanding the principles and applying them well will help you develop effectiveness in training over time. My next piece of advice is, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. If training is going well, it may still be tempting to try and do new things, but honestly, if it is going really well, it's probably best not to deviate from it unless things are starting to get a little bit stale. Not to say that there isn't scope for experimentation, but be careful with how much you are doing that with training programming. You may well easily be halting what would have been good training progress. And my final advice is have a little bit of humility to ask for help. Ultimately, training programming is complex problem solving. And the thing is, we all have blind spots with our thinking. And the only way of expanding our thinking is shedding light to our blind spots through speaking to someone else about our obstacles with our programming. So I personally have a couple of mentors that I reach out to for going through my processes and programming. So I use this to see where I may be going wrong at times, especially when I do find an issue that I'm struggling to solve. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, if designing effective training is the goal, then you need to know when to reach out for an extra perspective. And the last thing you want is to be stuck at a point where the programming is constantly being ineffective. So if you guys found this video useful, go check out this other video about programming and let me know what you think. And as always, click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you guys on the next one.